Introducing Rabbi Joel Zeff at 10 o'clock sharp on a Wednesday morning as we zip along with Zoom with the Father Shkola. And Rabbi Zeff will start his shiur, the obligation of the Sume on Purim, and the Kolbo and linguistic analysis.
So that probably sounds a little mysterious. So let me give a brief introduction, and then we'll pull up the text. And I apologize for sending out the text so late. People should have received that. There's a link. You can pull it up. But we'll also do a screen share. And everybody can hear me okay?
Yep.
So what are we going to talk about today? What I wanted to do is revisit an issue which is on some level, it's a common shiur to give, but I'm not going to address the common issues. So let me back up. We have coming up the holiday of Purim, and perhaps the most obscure and strange feature of the holiday of Purim is the fact that people tend to get inebriated on Purim, and there's a Talmudic source for that. This is sort of a strange custom because, for example, there's a Yiddish expression, shikr via goy. I don't know if you ever heard that expression, which means drunk as a goy, as a non-Jew. Now, without getting into the implications of that comment and perhaps even offensive implications of that comment, the point is that that Yiddish expression reflects the fact that it was not considered to be a Jewish thing to do to get drunk. And yet we have this holiday in which a lot of people get drunk. Now, it's very common, and I'm sure you've been exposed to a shiur like this before, to discuss what are all the differences of opinion on how drunk you have to get. Just a little bit, a real lot, a medium amount, etc. We're not going to discuss that. What I want to discuss is a really fascinating understanding of this mitzvah from a sefer called Kolbo. What's even more interesting is we're not 100% sure who wrote this book, but it's considered to be a very important book from the Middle Ages. We'll introduce a little bit more as we go on. And he makes a very radical claim concerning this particular mitzvah of getting drunk. And what we're going to do is, using the Sefer Kolbo approach as a frame, we're going to engage in some linguistic analysis of the most important word in the Talmud, which is purportedly the basis of this mitzvah of getting drunk on Purim. So the first thing I'll do is do a screen share. And by the miracle of modern technology, let's see what happens. I hope that everybody is seeing on their screen where it says the Kolbo and linguistic analysis. Everybody see that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, thumbs up. And before we begin, I think it'd be appropriate to make a l'chaim. L'chaim. Right, morning dose of arak. Getting prepared for Purim. Okay, now let's take a look at this very, very famous passage in the Talmud. I hope it's familiar to most of you. And for your learning convenience, you should know I did this just for you. I have every single text in English, and I'm not joking. I just did it for you. That's why I sent it out late, because I was trying to find the English and put it in there. Okay, so I just want you to appreciate it. Now, let's learn the Gemara here. Amar Rava. Rava said the following: Mechayev idish levesume before you. A person is obligated to become intoxicated with wine, as it says here. Now, the word for intoxicated in Aramaic here is levesume. That's going to be the topic of today's discussion, a linguistic analysis of the word levesume. Let's finish the passage of the Talmud. So a person is obligated to get levesume, to get intoxicated on Purim. Ad delo yada ben aror haman levarach Mordechai, till he can't tell the difference in curse and behave blessed be Mordechai. I also want to point out, by the way, the English translation here is from the Koran translation of the Talmud, which is not a literal translation. It literally translates the words of the Talmud, but it adds in kind of connecting words so that the Talmudic text reads well. And I got this off an amazing site that's accessible to anybody, which is called Al HaTorah, and I believe it's also accessible through Sefaria. You may have heard of these two websites, totally free. At least you don't have to pay for it. Somebody's paying for it. So alhatorah.com or Sefaria, just .com. Either of those, you can access this translation, paraphrase of the Talmud. Okay. Then the Talmud goes on and tells a story, very famous story, that two rabbis wanted to fulfill this mitzvah in the best possible way of getting intoxicated, and apparently they did fulfill it in a very remarkable way. Rabbi Zera Abadu Sudat Purim Bahade Hadade. So these great sages, Rabbi and Rabbi Zera, they made their Purim meal together, Ibsum, and they became intoxicated. Ibsum, that word in the Talmud, is just the same word as levesume, which is translated here as to get drunk, intoxicated. That's going to be our linguistic analysis for today, that word. Kam Rabba Ushkate le Rabbi Zera. So Rabba got up in the middle of the Suudah. He's quite intoxicated, and he slaughtered Rabbi Zera, took a knife, cut his buddy's throat, and killed him. Lemachar by Rachme. And the next morning, Rabba gets up out of his drunken stupor. He looks over and he sees his buddy, Rabbi Zera, who is drunk. Who is dead. Dead drunk. He actually is dead. And what did he do? He's a little bit of trouble here. He just killed his best friend. He decided to daven, ask the Kodesh Baruch Hu for mercy, v'achyeh. And believe it or not, Rabbi Zera got up from the dead. Amazing. And a religion was founded upon this amazing episode of Rabbi Zera getting up from the dead. So I'm just joking about that. The Shana Amarle, the next year, Rabba went back to Rabbi Zera, and he said, Nete Marvanabi Sudat Purim Bahade Hadade. We had so much fun last year. Would you like to come again to my house for Purim? And we'll do it again. Amarle. So Rabbi Zera famously answered, Lo b'chol shata b'shata midrache shnisa. We can't assume that every time that a miracle will occur. So, I'm not going to go to your home to celebrate Purim with you because I'm afraid that you're going to kill me again, and I can't assume I'm going to be resurrected. Okay, that's the famous passage in the Talmud.
Is this an agadic passage?
Yeah. So I'm sorry. Maybe Irving will get his question, then we'll go to your question, Bruce. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That two rabbis got together, and they got so drunk that one killed the other one. How could they get the guy to come back? He's dead. God does not give you back your neshama because you got drunk. You're dead, and you're dead. That's it.
Okay, that's an interesting question. It's a good question, and I'd say the following. So maybe precisely because of that question, there are many commentators who say that this story is a kind of allegory. It's not meant to be taken literally. And when it says that they got drunk and Rabbi killed Rabbi Zera, it doesn't mean literally killed them, that it refers to they were in a higher state of consciousness or something like that. So that might be a response to your question. But it is true that if you just take it at face value, that's what happened. And miracles do happen. We believe in miracles. And Rabba killed Rabbi Zera. Even the finest people, when they get drunk, sometimes behave in a way which is not so noble. You may have heard the expression, Nichnas hayayin yotze hasod. It's a Talmudic expression. When the wine goes in, the secrets come out. So people will sometimes act in a way which they wouldn't normally act when they're under the influence of alcohol. And when you take this at face value, God performed a miracle. Bruce.
Well, my question was, if this is an agadic passage, why are we looking for some, if we are looking for any halachic, anything halachic from it?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Now, let's define halacha and agadah. So, just literally, of course, halacha is law and agadah is non-law story. So, if you take a look at that passage again, I pulled it up on the screen here. So, we'll just look at it in English. You could definitely divide it up into two components. There's Rava's statement that a person is obligated to come intoxicated with wine, right? On Purim, livasume. And then there's the story. So you could theoretically divide this into two parts. There is Rava, which is stated in classic halachic terms. Chayev inish livasume. Chayav means I'm obligated. That's a halachic. It's very hard not to take it as a halachic statement. Now, it's true that the second paragraph is a story. So the fact that it's followed by a story, it's a story. But the first part of it sounds like a halacha. And indeed, we'll see later, this is codified in Shulchan Aruch. It's taken as a as a halacha, and it sounds like a halacha. And the only part that Bruce, that might be leading you astray, if you're being led astray, is the second paragraph. But you could separate the two, like I in fact did in this source sheet here. Okay, fine. Now I just want to show you that everybody understands the story except for the Kalbo, this mysterious book, which we're going to talk about in a couple minutes. Understands this story and the halacha which precedes it, more or less literally, and the levasume is understood as to get drunk. So I just want to show you in the Rambam here, and let's see here. I can't do the whole thing on the screen at the same time here. So maybe we'll do it this way. I'll read it in Hebrew, and then you'll have the English in front of you here. Okay. So the Rambam says the following: Ketzad chovat sudazo. What's the nature of this obligation to make a meal? Shiochal basar. You should eat fleishiks. Eat fleishiks like a real man, like Bruce. You make a mango, or you make brisket, something. No, quiche. No quiche. That's for sissies, not for real men. Eat meat. And you should prepare a meal as beautiful as you can afford. And you should drink wine ad sheyishtaker, until he gets shikur, drunk. The Rambam is translating the word livasume in the Talmud. Ishtaker, get drunk. And then you should fall asleep in your state of drunkenness. That sounds like you get pretty drunk. And then the Rambam goes on, and he just talks about when you're budgeting. You'll see why I'm reading this. It'll become important later. He talks about, I'll just paraphrase it for now. When you're budgeting, so for Purim, we don't have an unlimited budget. You should make a nice meal. But you know something? You should make a priority in your budgeting for the mitzvah of matanot levyanim, giving tzedakah, giving charity. Right? Maybe pare down, more modest, and the mishloach manot that people send, the packages of gifts that people send to each other, doesn't have to be so fancy. Focus on charity, because that brings happiness to unfortunate people. And just as God takes care of the downtrodden, when we take care of the downtrodden, we're like God in that respect, and that's a wonderful thing. Fine. Just want to show you. Rambam says it means yishtaker, get shicker. Very clear. Now, I want to show you another important of the commentators. This commentator, very interesting, Sefer Abu Darham, or something called Abu Draham. So he was a commentator who lived in the 14th century in Spain, and he wrote perhaps the most important sefer in the period of the medieval authorities, the Rishonim, on Sidur. Whenever you learn Sidur seriously, you're going to be learning this sefer Abu Darham, or Abu Draham. Most important sefer from time of the Rishonim on davening. And in discussing this particular mitzvah, so he also says, I'll read you the first part in Hebrew there, and I'll scroll down to the English, you'll be able to see the English. V'im tamar he'achivu chachamim lishtaker b'Purim. And if you'll ask, how could it be that the sages obligated us lishtaker? I try not to be subtle here. Do you notice I made bold that word lishtaker? Very subtle. Shikker. That's his translation of Livisume from the Talmud. And he says, Bruce, by the way, the sages obligated. It's not Agadah. This is a halakha. That's the language of the Talmud, chayav. So he says, you'll ask, like Irv did, how could it be that the sages obligated us to get drunk in Purim? Sounds like a strange obligation. Here, I'll scroll down to the English here, and then I'll read the rest in Hebrew, because he gives an interesting answer, which I want to make sort of a side point about. He says, he says, this is a very strange mitzvah. If you take a look in the Torah makes it clear that it's a pretty big problem to get drunk. The story of Noah, when he finished his luxury cruise, got off the boat, planted a vineyard, got drunk, something really terrible happened to him, though it's not clear exactly what, but it was not good. Lot, after Sodom and Amorah were destroyed, Lot gets drunk, his daughters get him drunk, and then something very inappropriate happens between him and his daughters. So if the Torah is trying to tell us implicitly something about the effects of alcohol and what it leads to, it's not a pretty picture. So how could it be that the sages obligated us to get shikker? Answer, it's because, he suggests, that if you take a look at all the miracles during the holiday of Purim, they all occurred in the context of mishteh, a feast. That word mishteh doesn't just mean a feast, it comes from the word lishtot, to drink. Every turning point in the story happens in the context of drinking wine, a big feast. And he points out specifically, in the beginning of the story, what happens? Vashti is deposed. In the context of what? The big drinking festival, which he didn't attend. And he quotes the pasuk. And he goes on, Uva Esther tachteha, and Esther replaces her. What was the inaugural ball? Right? He replaces her. Ayidei mishteh, a drunken feast. Again. And he goes on. How did Haman get deposed? It's because Esther made a mishteh, a drunken feast. So every single turning point in the story is in the context of getting drunk. A feast. And then just the last sentence there, and therefore he says, V'lachen chivu lishtaker b'Purim. That's why the sages obligate us to get drunk in Purim. It's because the miracle happened because of mishteh yain, this feast of drinking wine. Shasta is there, that Esther made, etc. And now the miracle will be remembered through us drinking wine. Okay. Just want to point out what I find so interesting about this is what he's really saying. So first of all, it means to get drunk. Levasume means lishtaker. But the side point I want to make, which is really interesting, is that he's explaining why do we do it even though it's not so good to get drunk? It's because Purim is the theatrical reenactment of the events. That's what he's saying here. That we are putting on a play on Purim. That's what Purim is about. We're not remembering it. We're reenacting it. And that's why we make a drinking feast, because we're reliving the events. And the most instrumental moments in the story were all in the context of a drinking feast. So we make a drinking feast because we are reliving, reenacting theatrically the events. Just want to point out that we don't often see it this way, but that's a very central theme in how we observe our holidays. It's not remembering, it's reenacting. You know why we sit in the sukkah? It's not to remember. We're reliving, we're reenacting. We're reenacting. Hashem providing Sukkot, whatever Sukkot were, clouds of glory, real Sukkot, real booths, doesn't matter. All the Jewish holidays are reenacting. The Seder of Purim is a reenactment. Sorry, the Seder of Pesach is a reenactment of Yetziat Mitzrayim. You know, their customs, walking around the table. You ever seen anybody do this? They walk around the table, everybody, and you say to your neighbor as you're walking around, where are you coming from? And you answer, oh, I came from Egypt. Where are you going? I'm going to Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to Efrat. You ever see a custom that people take leeks and they beat each other with leeks at the Seder? That's reenactment. That's the Egyptian taskmasters beating up the Jews. Theater is a central motif in the structure of Jewish holidays. We're not remembering, we're reliving theatrically. Now we can explain with this a very strange custom of Purim. Why do people dress up on Purim? So there's all these beautiful mystical explanations. I think they're nice, but I don't think they're true historically. What's true historically, I believe, based upon the Abu Darham, is since we are theatrically reenacting the events, if you're an actor, you need a costume. You need to dress up. That's part of playing the character. And it's famous, the idea of a Purim spiel. A Purim spiel is a Purim play. That's not some later custom. That's really what Purim is a Purim spiel. It's a theatrical enactment of the holiday, and that's why we dress up. And according to this, you should not dress up as Batman or Batwoman, or as any other superhero, or as a soldier, or any other thing. You should dress up as the characters in the story. Haman, Esther, Mordecai, Hashverosh, etc. Because we are theatrically enacting the story. The fact that people now dress up as Batman, right? That's actually, I believe, a corruption of the custom, which really is rooted in the essential meaning of how we observe Purim, which is the theatrical reenactment of this holiday. Okay, fine. Now, we're going to take a look at how other Rishonim understand this mitzvah of levesume. What does the word levesume mean? And it'll also address Bruce's question. This is a very famous comment of Rabbeinu Nissim, 14th century Catalonia. By the way, I'm amazed more each day at the impact of Spanish Jewry upon the development of Torah. When you take a look at the Rishonim, the most seminal and authoritative commentaries and law codes, 80%, 90%, Spain. Beyond belief. Beyond belief. Look what the Ran says. V'chatav Rabbeinu Ephraim Zal, who did the Kam Rabba Shachti Rabbi Zera, Kinita B'Gemara, It Chele Mimre de Rabba, Below Shapir Dami Lemev Adhaki. Says the following. This is Bruce's point. Why does the Torah tell you a story, an Agadah, about Rabbah getting up and killing Rabbi Zera? Maybe we shouldn't learn a halakha from it, just a story. So Rabbeinu Nissim, who's quoting a Rabbeinu Ephraim, says that there is when Rabbah said to get drunk on Purim, he meant it as a halakha. And the following Agadah of Rabbah killing Rabbi Zera is not just some a story. It's a story to tell you, look what happens when you follow the halachic decision of Rabbah, who said get drunk on Purim. Look what happened to Rabbi Zera. Therefore, the Talmud records that seeming Agadah, Bruce, that seeming Agadah, for halachic purposes. To tell you, we don't paskin that you're obligated to get drunk. No drinking on Purim. And that's the purpose of that story.
I thought that they could easily paskin Don't carry knives when you drink. Drink as much as you want, but don't come with a knife.
Yeah. So I'm not sure you're serious or not, but unfortunately, there are many ways of killing people. And as a matter of fact, as a lifelong member of the National Rifle Association, guns don't kill people; people kill people. I actually am not a member of the National Rifle Association, but they do say that, and that's a response to your point there. Even though I am a gun owner, but I'm not a member of the NRA. Okay, fine. Now, you notice that it's clear that Rabbeinu Nissim, quoting Rabbeinu Ephraim, certainly assumes that the word livasume means to get drunk, or else he wouldn't have to then say that the following next story is to tell you that we don't paskin that you have to get drunk, right? But he assumes the Talmudic word livasume means to get drunk. Fine. Now take a look at the next source here. So this is Sefer HaEshkol. Sefer Eshkol. Guess what? Nobody knows who wrote it. So the Sefer Eshkol says, arguing with the previous opinion of Rabbeinu Ephraim about the significance of the story. He says, look, the Sefer Eshkol just said that the purpose of the story is to tell you we don't paskin like the opinion that says you have to get drunk. That's why he tells you the story. So he says, no, I think it's the opposite. You can prove from the story that, in fact, you are obligated to get drunk. Why? Because when Rabbah went to Rabbi Zera the following year and said, didn't we have fun last year? Would you please come to my Purim Suda again? What, in fact, Rabbi Zera should have answered, it's a little bit like Bruce said, you know what? I'm happy to come, but not to bring a knife. That's not what he says. He says, I'm happy to come, but no drinking. If there wasn't an obligation to drink, then he would have said, I'll come, but only near beer, or grape juice. No alcohol this year. The fact that he had to say, I'm not coming at all, an outright rejection means that apparently you do have to get drunk. It's just, I'm not going to do it with you because I see what happens. You can't hold your liquor. So you have two medieval authorities that look at the same sequence in the Talmud of stating the halacha, you have to get drunk, livasume, if that means to get drunk. And then the anecdote of one rabbi killing another, one saying that proves that you don't have to get drunk. It's actually rejecting the previous halacha. And the other opinion says, no, it proves you do have to get drunk, because otherwise, Rabbi Zer would have said, I'll come, but no alcohol. Fine. Now, are you ready for a linguistic analysis? That was all an introduction. But we're out of time, I'm sorry. Baruch Hashem, we have time left. I want to show you something that just blows my mind. I can't explain this. How people could have seemingly made what seems to me a pretty radical mistake. Let's start off with this kolbo, the sefer that's going to be the framing of our linguistic adventure here. No one knows exactly who wrote this sefer. It doesn't mean it's not an important sefer, by the way. It's a very important sefer. Some people think it was written by Rabbi Aaron HaKohen of Lunel in Provence in the 14th century, early 14th century, but we don't know 100%. Whoever wrote it knew what he was talking about. Look what he says. V'chayev init levesume before you. He just quotes the Talmud. A man is obligated levesume. That's the Talmudic word, levesume, which we just saw everybody from A to Z or A to Z, depending on where you're from, says levesume means to get drunk. Look what he says. Lo shishtaker. It doesn't mean to get drunk. No. Lo shishtaker. It doesn't mean to get drunk. And he goes on. Shashihut isur gamor. Getting drunk is a complete and utter prohibition. You're not allowed to get drunk. Not a Jewish thing. There's no bigger transgression than getting drunk. Wow. Okay. people get drunk, they do terrible things. By the way, it's actually, this is statistically, if you look at cases of murder, etc., especially domestic, these things happen in the context of alcohol. Shugorem l'gilui arayot. Alcohol leads to sexual transgression, shfichut damim, murder, ulekama averot zulatan, and other very serious transgressions. Some of this we know from the Torah itself, like the Abu Darham pointed out. Noach, Lot, sexual impropriety. Murder, we know that from the Talmud, Rabbi Zera. So wait a second. I don't understand what the obligation is then. What's this levesume? So he says, you should drink a little bit more than you usually drink. So you have a glass of wine with dinner every night, so have a glass and a half on Purim. Glass and a half. Just a little bit more than you usually have for dinner. You know, by the way, up until modern times, people drank wine with their meals. It's like standard. Why? Why should you drink a little bit more? What's the purpose of this mitzvah? In order to be more happy. And you'll bring joy to poor people. And you'll comfort them. You'll speak to their hearts. This is the complete happiness, the complete joy of Purim. I'm going to return to that last sentence at the end. So the Kolbo is suggesting the word levasume does not mean to get drunk. And he points out halachically, ethically, etc., why it cannot possibly mean there's an obligation to get drunk. And then he says, what does it mean at a practical level? Drink tiny bit more than you usually have for dinner. So now, you ready for this? Put on your seatbelts. Like I said a few minutes ago, I have no understanding of how what I'm about to say now seems to be ignored. We're going to look at the immediately previous paragraph in the Talmud, right before the Talmud says a person's obligated to get drunk, levasume, and it tells the story of Rabbah killing Rabbi Zera. The immediate previous passage in the Talmud, immediate previous to that. Let's read what it says, and we'll scroll down to it. Talmud says the following. It describes the gastronomic adventures of Abaye. A little bit of overeating here, as you'll see. Amar Abaye, ki nafke mi be mar have savana. He describes that he was at his Rebbe's having the Purim Studa. They had a nice meal, and when he left, he was completely satiated. But I don't know if you've ever done this, sort of going Suda hopping. After he was done with going to his Rebbe's house, he went to visit another Purim Suda to say hi and give his regards. It happened to be the house of the Reish Galuta, the head of the Jewish community in Babylonia, who was a very wealthy person, a very lavish Purim Suda. So remember, he's already full. He's eaten his full. And he goes to give his regards, pays his respects to the Reish Galuta. Kimate lahatam, when he went to the house of the Reish Galuta, krivuli shitin sai de shiti mine kedera. They served me 60 plates of 60 kinds of cooked dishes. This was a lavish meal. I ate 60 portions from each of them. He was already full, and he had this huge next meal. Ubishula batraita havukarile tzali kedar ubao lemechasa abatra. He ate the whole thing down to the very last drop. They even brought him dessert, pot roast. And after all of that, he said he was so enthusiastic, he wanted to eat the plate itself. This is binge eating, if I've ever heard of it. So the Talmud says this episode of eating is a demonstration of a popular saying. And in continuation of bias, this explains the folk saying that people say the poor man is hungry and does not know it. Like, he thought he was full after he left the house of his Rebbe. But when he sat down in front of another huge repast, somehow he discovered his hunger, even though he didn't know he had it before. And then the Talmud explains an expression I like a little bit better, that maybe this is an example of another expression. And that expression is, room in the stomach for sweets can always be found. By the way, the manufacture of Jell-O, everybody here know what Jell-O is, right? What's the advertising slogan for Jell-O?
There's always room for jelly.
You got it. There's always room for Jell-O. Right. That's based upon the Talmud. That's exactly what this Aramaic expression means. That room in the stomach for sweets can always be found. Okay. Now, I want to show you something amazing. How do you say in Aramaic, there's always room for Jell-O? Right? That's a Talmudic expression. So the Aramaic is, I'm going to scroll up to it so you'll see it. It's important to see it in the Aramaic. Ravcha levesima shachiach. The word ravcha is like in Hebrew revach, space, there's room. Levesima, for dessert, sweets. Shchiach means found. There's always found room, levesima. Now, I hope you'll notice the word levesima is the exact same word as in the next passage in the Gemara, the very next sentence, where Rava says, Chai binish levesume, and a person obligated levesume. It's the exact same word. When we first see that word, which is in the context of there's always room for Jell-O, that word levesume, levesima, in the noun form. That means what? Look in Rashi. Ravcha levesima shachiach. Room for levesima is always found. Rashi says, Revach matsui lidvar matok b'toch hame'ayim. Room is always found for something sweet in your kishkas. Levesima means sweet. It's the very previous sentence in the Talmud. And right after that is when we find that a person is obligated levesume on Purim.
Would a sweet wine or a sweet liqueur join the two ideas?
Perhaps. But it is significant that it doesn't say to get drunk. It says to sweeten. Now, I'm far from done with this linguistic analysis. I hope I'm not spoiling your party, Bruce. Okay. So, let me ask you something. Anybody can answer this question. If levesume meant to get shicker, then I'll do a little analysis. Let's go through the Tanakh, and every place we find the word shicker, to get drunk. I'm going to look in the Aramaic translation of that word, where the Hebrew biblical text says shikr. I'm going to look at the Aramaic translation of the word shikr, and what should it be according to all these Rishonim who say it means it gets drunk? The translation should be livasume, means to get drunk. Put in your seatbelts for a little bit of linguistic analysis.
By the way, is the word summa for a blind person spelled similarly?
Yeah, except for that's with a bet. That's not with a bet, right? Summa meaning blind and livasume with a bet. It's two different roots. Okay, but I like that your direction, but different root. Okay. Let's start from the very beginning. Reshit. Noach. Vayesh min hayayin vayishkar. Noach, he drank from the wine, and he got shikr. Vayishkar, he got shikr. Vayikah b'toch ha'olo, he was naked in his tent. Let's look at the Targum, the Aramaic translation of Onkelos, my favorite Uncle Lewis. Let's take a look, Targum Onkelos. V'shate min chamra, he drank from the wine. V'rave. Now you see, I was very subtle here. I bolded it and underlined the Aramaic word for shikr. What is not the word for shikr in Aramaic?
Livasume.
Livasume. It's here. Uncle says verave. Completely different word. Interesting. I ain't done. Let's take a look at another use of the word shikr in Tanakh, and let's see how it's translated into Aramaic. A lot of people forget about this pasuk. It's the description of Yosef gathering his brothers together. They have a big meal, and the Torah says, just read the last few words, Vayishtu vayishkeru imo. They drank, and they got shikr, vayishkeru. They got drunk with him. Let's take a look at the Targum of my favorite Uncle Lewis. Last few words. Vishatiu, they drank. V'raviu ime. Very subtle again. Bold, underlined. What's the word? What we've expected. Shikr, vayishkeru, to be translated is from the word livasume. No, v'raviu. Well, I'll be a monkey's uncle. That's 2 out of 2. When the word shikr appears in the biblical text, the Aramaic translation is v'rave, v'raviu, resh, vav, yud. That's the root.
So, but none of these cases are drinking for a mitzvah. Could there be a difference in the intention behind the drinking would lead to a different word?
I mean, I understand your point, except I don't know why it should matter. The word shikr means shikr. And if you're going to translate it into another language, you have to use the word for shikr to get drunk. I mean, I understand your point, but I'm not sure why it should change anything. Okay. Maybe you'll claim, well, that's in the Torah. What about later parts of the Tanakh? No problem. One of the most famous examples of at least claimed getting drunk is Hannah, right? Hannah is praying to Hashem. She's heartbroken. And Eli thinks she's shikr. Look at the words in the book of Shmuel. Read in Hebrew. Vayachshaveha Eli l'shikura. And Eli thought she was shikura, shikr, drunk. We would have thought the Aramaic translation of that pasuk would be related to the word livasume. Let's look at the Aramaic translation. There's no Targum Onkelos on Nach. There's a Targum Yonatan, the Aramaic translation. Let's read the Aramaic translation. I know everybody here is fluent in Aramaic. V'chashva Eli ki'itata Ravya. And Eli thought her ki'itata as a woman who was Ravya, shikr. 3 out of 3. The word shikr in Tanakh is translated with the Aramaic word Resh Vav Yud. So you might say, maybe in later stages of Aramaic, Livasume means to get drunk. We have no need to go further than Masechet Megillah, the same Masechet that talks about Purim. Watch this. Interesting halacha. Amar Rabbi Shvatya, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Kol korei b'lo ni'ima v'shoneh b'lo zimra, Allah katuv omer, v'gam ani natati lehem chukim lo tovim, u'mishpatim lo yichyu bahem. Rabbi Shvatya said in name Rabbi Yochanan that anybody who reads Torah without a beautiful song, melody, or you learn Mishnah without a melody, right? Now, in terms of reading the Torah, we understand when you read Torah, we sing it. You ever seen in a traditional Beit Midrash how people learn? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. You don't read it, you sing it. As a matter of fact, I think though in Torah we have Trump, we have the Tamei Mikra, the actual notes, to know how to sing it. Some communities have that for Mishnah too, that there's a very specific cantillation for Mishnah, believe it or not. I think in Or Detzion, that school system in Efrat, I think that they use that system. They teach the kids Mishnah with that system. I'm not 100% sure, but there is such a system. And the Talmud says if you don't do that, then the verse from Yechezkel, Ezekiel, applies to you that says, I give them laws that were not good and judgments whereby they should not live. Like that these laws I've given them, they've robbed them of all their sweetness and goodness, and they won't be a source of life to them if you just read Torah and just read Mishnah instead of singing it beautifully. That verse is applied to people who don't sing beautifully the Torah or Mishnah. So then the Talmud says, Matkif le Abaye. So Abaye freaks out. Abaye says, by the way, Abaye figures prominently in the whole story that we're dealing with, getting drunk, by a Rav, etc. So the Abaye says, how could this be? Mishum de lo yada levesume kala. Just because someone doesn't know how to levesume kala. Now look at the Aramaic text here in the Talmud. I'm very subtle here. It says, just because someone doesn't know levesume kala. Kala means voice, like the Hebrew word kol. And levesume, that's our word. This is not dealing with Purim Suda at all. This is dealing with saying a beautiful melody. Sing a beautiful melody. Just because someone doesn't know how to make a beautiful melody with their voice, we're going to say that they're not going to live. So then the Talmud says, okay, maybe it means something different, as the Talmud concludes. And it means that two Torah scholars who dwell in the same city and are not pleasant with one another in matters of halacha, and they quarrel and store up controversy. So that's what Ezekiel was talking about. It's that instead of rabbis cooperating and helping each other, instead they fight and stir up controversy. That's what it means that God is saying, I gave them laws that turned out to be not good, or they're abused, and laws that aren't adding to life. So they're not going to live through those laws. So that's referring to rabbis who don't get along. Notice something. The Talmud says, just because someone doesn't know how to have a beautiful voice, we're going to condemn them to death because they can't sing beautifully the Torah or the Mishnah. It's our word, livasume, livasume. What does livasume mean? Look in the Kalbo. It to sweeten the voice. And you can see from the Talmudic context, the Abai is saying, just because a person doesn't have a good voice, a sweet voice, what obviously does lavasume not mean? It does no way does it mean getting drunk. That would make complete nonsense out of this passage in the Talmud. Abai is saying, just because someone doesn't have a sweet voice, you're going to say he's going to die? That's what the Talmud says. No, it's not talking about that. It's talking about rabbis who don't get along. Lavasume means sweet, sweet, sweet. The way you say get drunk in Aramaic is resh vav yud, rave. Wow. We've just discovered by a linguistic and literary analysis that the word lavasume in the Talmud, even in the Talmudic text, which immediately precedes the discussion of getting drunk, so-called, on Purim, the word lavasume appears there, as we saw, and it meant dessert, something sweet, eating something sweet. There's always room for jello. We see here also the same masechet, lavasume kala, to make your voice sweet, having a good voice. Nothing to do with getting drunk. It means sweet. We saw that every place the Tanakh uses the word shikr. It's not translated in Aramaic lavasume. It's translated ravya. Wow. There is no obligation, according to the Kabbalah, to get drunk. Does not exist. Amazing. So what would be the meaning of a person's obligated to be sweet on Purim? So that's why the Kabbalah says it has nothing to do with getting drunk whatsoever. On the contrary, getting drunk is forbidden. It means to have a sweet disposition, like a sweet voice, like jello, like dessert at the end of the meal. How do you do that? You drink a glass of wine and a tiny bit more, or like Bruce mentioned, a little bit of liqueur, brandy, a little bit, a little sweet. That's it. Amazing. And to tell you the truth, and this may be chutzpahdik on my part, this is so compelling in my eyes. I don't really understand the other Rishonim, and I don't understand the Shulchan Aruch. In light of the Kalbo's suggestion and all the proofs we brought, this thorough linguistic and literary analysis, lavasume does not mean to get drunk.
So we have a case of Hillel was asked to Shaila, and he said, I don't know for sure. Let's look what the Jews do. Could we say that looking what people do in general for many centuries lends itself to how Jews have typically interpreted the halakha here, despite the Kobo's linguistic analysis?
So they voted with their feet, as it were.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so that's a good point. I just want to point out that I'm being a little bit I'm exaggerating slightly. I do know why the other Rishonim interpret is to get drunk, and to a certain extent, I understand why people follow that opinion. And that is because otherwise it's hard to understand the story, right? Because Rabbi and Rabbi Zera, they perform the mitzvah and then one kills the other person. So in light of the Kalbo's understanding of lavasume, what happened there? They had jello. Rabbi ate too much jello, and then he killed Rabbi Zera. So I understand. I understand why the Rishonim understood lavasume in that way. They said, well, there's nothing that I know that they didn't know. There's nothing that I know that the Rambam didn't know, the Ran didn't know, the Abu Durham didn't know, Sefer Eshkol didn't know, right? Obviously. It's just that they said that maybe sweet in this context means it's like a euphemism for getting blasted out of your mind or something like that. Okay. But the Kalbo's point is very well taken. Very well taken. Now, I want to end in the next couple minutes here with asking a question on the Kalbo and what I think emerges as a really powerful and beautiful point. There's another reason, by the way, that the other Rishonim uniformly understand as getting drunk. Not only is it otherwise hard to understand why Rabbah would have killed Rabbi Zera after eating Jello, but it's also hard to understand, according to Kalbo, what would it mean that a person should eat Jello so that they won't know the difference between cursed be Haman, blessed be Mordechai. What do you do with that part of the Talmud? Jello somehow, I don't know, maybe Jello does something to your brain cells that you can't think straight after eating Jello. I've never tried it. I don't know. What would that mean according to Kalbo? So I understand the other Rishonim. It makes sense. If you say to get sweet here is a euphemism for getting blasted out of your mind, so you can't tell the difference in cursed be Haman, blessed be Mordechai. I understand. But according to Kalbo, who has a very good argument, as we just pointed out, all those sources, levasume means sweet. It doesn't mean getting drunk. What does it mean? You can't deliver the curse of be blessed be Mordechai. I want to return to the Kalbo text and point out something really beautiful. The Kalbo explained why you're supposed to get sweet. Remember, he doesn't think it means get drunk. He thinks it means have a slightly more wine than usual, slightly, so that you have a sweet disposition. Why should that matter? Look what he says here, halfway through. He says, rather one should drink more than he's accustomed to have a sweet disposition, in order to increase his joy and make happy the poor and console them, speak to their hearts. For that is true joy. The Rambam said something similar. He said, have the majority of your budget for tzedakah, charity, because that's the true joy. But the Kalbo, who saw the Rambam, amplifies it in a really interesting way. According to the Rambam, there's two separate mitzvahs. There's the meal with getting drunk, and there's the mitzvah of charity, separate mitzvah. Just budget more in charity than in the meal. The Kalbo says those two mitzvahs are linked. The mitzvah of getting sweet on Purim is in order to fulfill the mitzvah of charity. Look at his words again. One should drink more than is accustomed in order to increase his joy and make happy the poor and console them, speak to their hearts. That is true joy. You notice how he interprets the mitzvah of giving charity, not just handing them 10 shekels. To console them and speak to their hearts. And I'm going to tell you the truth, and maybe I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this. We give tzedakah. People knock on our doors, not just Purim. I open the door a crack, I slip out some shekels, and I close the door quick. I never invite them in. I don't sit them down. I don't say, how you doing? What's it been like for you? Only if they pay me for therapy would I do that. I'm not going to do it for a schnorrer. Why? Schnorrers are often not very attractive people. You know, I don't think I want to get too close. Like it could be infectious. I don't want to be a miskain. Just open the door, give it to them, and shut the door. Kalbo says it's not enough. Speak to their hearts, console them. In order to do that, you have to have a sweet disposition. If I drank a little bit more wine, a shot of whiskey, maybe I would invite him in. That's how the Kalbo understands this mitzvah. The mitzvah of becoming sweet on Purim is to be able to fulfill the mitzvah of charity to the poor in a holistic and proper way, to speak to their hearts and to console them. For that is the true joy of Purim. And with that, I will end and Wish everybody Shabbat Shalom and a very joyous